influencers are entrepreneurs that are running small businesses, right? And this is a conversation that's surfacing in the workforce around equity, fair pay. Why are we having a negative opinion about influencers being transparent about the fees that they're getting paid?
Welcome to Punchy by Rival, where we take the gloves off to share the hard-hitting realities of the challenger marketing world. Each week, we'll break down the buzz and cut through the BS of the top stories and trends to tell you what you really need to know and do differently to grow your brand and career. Here we are. I am really excited about this one. Kim, obviously, you and I go way back, as we were just talking about 10 years ago. In the VaynerMedia New York and then San Francisco office, which is crazy. And then obviously you've been up to a lot. So do you want to introduce yourself quickly to our audience?
Yeah. So I am currently the CMO of Tagger, Tagger Media, which is an influencer discovery platform, social insights, newly appointed to the role. So prior to Tagger, I am much of a startup girl. So obviously early days of VaynerMedia, moved on to independent consulting, entertainment brands, and then to a startup called Go Disco prior to this, which is an event discovery platform. So yeah, I've been in the event or in the sort of entertainment and emerging media world for about the last 20 years.
Amazing. And I appreciate you joining us very early for anybody, 7 a.m. on the West Coast
Tough.
of LA, but I know particularly early for you. DuBose, how are things in Croatia? I see the Wi-Fi is somewhat holding up this time. Oh, nope. I think you're on mute.
No, that's the Wi-Fi. We mentioned it, so now it knows to drop. But if we pretend it's not here, it should carry on for the next few minutes.
All right, DuBose. Punchy, this is the fourth round. Do you think you're going to be able to pull out a win finally?
I'm going to disconnect from the Wi-Fi near the end of this to avoid finding out the answer to that.
Jenna, how are things across town in Copenhagen where we both are?
They're great. I forgot how nice it is being in a place where it's daylight. I think like 26 hours a day. I think there's 26 hours a day of daylight in Northern Europe in the summer. Yeah, it's pretty nice. I like it, actually.
All right. Let us get into it. So we got 3 stories to cover today. The first is L'Oreal's Garnier doubles down on esports with Team Vitality. The second is going to be about influencers and how they're charging more for their services across social media platforms. We're going to talk a little bit about the ROI of influencer marketing and how we should be thinking about it as a channel. And then lastly, a lightweight topic. We're going to be talking about why many brands have completely failed on their anti-racist promises, particularly in the US, and how challenger brands are really building this into the core of who they are and what they do. So we'll build up to that one. All right. So kicking it off, L'Oreal's Garnier doubles down on esports with Team Vitality. This is from Marketing Dive. So L'Oreal, their brand Garnier Fructis, has signed a partnership deal with Team Vitality. The collaboration builds on a previous campaign and spans 2022 and 2023. Basically, Team Vitality is a big esports organization. L'Oreal sees a lot of opportunity in this space. I've been, I'm not a gamer myself, but I think just from a professional marketing standpoint, there are going to be nearly 3 billion gamers in the world next year in 2023. And I think it's something like, I wish I had the stat in front of me, it's something like 80% of Gen Z. So this is clearly a play from them to tap into some of this underpriced attention, try to reach a younger audience. What do we think about it? Kim, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, so I love this because it's an unexpected partnership. And I think that look, we're talking about it, right? So I love when brands actually do things that can't be sort of read in the tea leaves. It doesn't make sense on paper, but when you dig deeper into that partnership, it makes a ton of sense. So I love that. But I also, more importantly, love that Garnier is actually like treating their target consumer like a human. Like they actually are multifaceted individuals that have interest in esports, but also can actually be into like, hair care or any other sort of like interest that doesn't traditionally fit with that esports stereotype. So I love that, Garnier is actually leaning into their target consumer as a human, most importantly.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting. I mean, I don't know too much about the product, but I assume it skews female. I also don't have the stat in front of me in terms of the gender skew for esports, but I assume it skews male.
60-40.
However,
60-40.
40 male or female?
Yeah, male.
Male. Yeah. I mean, I would imagine that there's probably not a lot of brands that are really deep into esports in terms of marketing, sponsorship, et cetera, but there's probably even fewer that are trying to reach a female audience. So I think it's a really interesting activation. DuBose,
But
what are your
also
thoughts
think
on
about,
this? Oh,
sorry,
sorry. Go
I
ahead,
have one
Kim.
thing. I was just going to say,
Yeah.
also think about, we're automatically assuming that Garnier is going after females, right? There are males that they could potentially be going after as well. So I think that's like an important call out.
Yep.
I mean, I would jump in there and be like, to that point, hair care is one of my primary interests. So
You can tell.
It's interesting to see that
It's
you build gaming around that. Exactly. I mean, I think on something like this, exactly to Kim's point, it's interesting that you see a unique approach to sponsorship and sports sponsorship beyond just the same tired avenues you normally get. I think there are a lot of brands out there that would look at something like this, and like all partnerships, it doesn't make sense until it does. And I think for opportunities like this, I think, gaming and esports it's not a surprising thing to go into anymore. There's a defined community there you can add a lot of value to, and you can provide a unique point of view on. And I think Garnier has come in there in a way to think about that's really powerful and really interesting.
You're just positioning for free product, DuBose.
I always need more product.
So
and you would smell amazing. The Garnier Fructis, it smells so good. That's like the best part about like that brand. Like it's really
Are you saying DuBose does not smell amazing now?
I haven't smelled DuBose in a long time, so I don't actually know.
Give me the clip. I'm taking that as the clip. I got a timestamp.
I haven't smelled DuBose.
We've got the title of the episode. It's great.
We got three. The three of us like it. Jenna, do you have a dissenting opinion, or are you on board with the rest of us?
I'm kind of on board. I actually like, there's a lot of things I like about this. Like I agree with everything Kim said about like, it's a cool partnership and I like it when brands do unexpected things. I also really aesthetically like the actual uniforms they put together. They look like the Microsoft, like Xbox, like rave green uniforms that Microsoft did for the Seattle Sounders, right? Like it's a good look. I like it. The only like question I like always ever have with this is that like whenever anybody goes, oh yeah, like 80% of Gen Z is gamers, or like, women are gamers too. Like I'm a console gamer. I have a PS4. I have every single Nintendo console up through like from the original NES to the Switch. But I play games, and I know that this is like such a marketer's like fallacy of like projecting my habits onto an audience. I still think that there's a gap between the people that like play or like are gamers and like watch esports. And I always think it's really weird when everybody's like, oh yeah, like Gen Z is like gamers and like therefore like esports sponsorships make sense. I mean, how many kids play soccer or football, and what is the viewership of professional soccer like in the United States? You know what I mean? Like I don't think it's like that much of a leap. And I do think, like I said, the audience is growing, but I do always think that's like an interesting part of the conversation of like people are gamers, therefore they're interested in esports. I have never watched, I play Overwatch, which has a competitive league. I have never watched a single competitive Overwatch match ever.
I also think the definition of gamer is interesting, right? Like I think when I was reading the stats around, Jenna, you're as a female gamer, you're playing on a console is actually like not the standard norm for females. They're actually playing on their mobile device. So the definition of gamer, I think we automatically go to that place of like, oh, they're on consoles or in like, a dark room, when really gamers are identifying as like mobile game players as well, like the Roblox of the world.
And I think
which I don't think
funny.
we think about that. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I think to that point, it's interesting because I think it comes down to the definition of gamer. I think even the demarcation of console and mobile is going to be broken down in the next few years with streaming gaming technology, not having to rely on hardware on device. And I think it's the same way with esports. You get the idea that, the defined I'm going to watch someone compete in Overwatch now is being supplemented by uploading a clip to Twitch and watching someone else play Twitch for a bit. It's, to Jenna, to your point, it's much closer to how football is now, right? There's 5 sides in someone's backyard. There's uploading kind of football tricks to YouTube, and then there's watching the Premier League. And I think like breaking down the walls between those to where there's more kind of seamless content being consumed on either side of it is going to mean that, a lot of the language we're using to define how we talk about gamers is probably too rigid for how gaming's developing.
Didn't Apple like just announce, I think that like they're going to be like compatible with the Nintendo Switch like controllers that you can use Nintendo Switch controllers like for your Apple device. I may have hallucinated that. I think that's a real thing.
Are you manifesting that, Jenna?
I hope so. If I did hallucinate that, I am now manifesting that, because that would be super cool, is to like use, because I like the Switch controllers are so great. Like Nintendo's like hardware design is like, I think, up there with Apple's.
100%.
Yeah. Now I need to see if this is a real thing, because I'm going to be disappointed if it's not. But yeah, but to the definition of like breaking down the walls, like really my point there was that like using Nintendo to play mobile games like on your Apple like devices is like, yeah, like, does that make you a console gamer or a mobile gamer? Like, I don't know. Yeah. Deep
Well, you
questions.
can Google it while I move us on to the
will.
next topic. So quick check-in on points. Kim, you get 4 points for your answers, but also for getting up early. DuBose, you get
Thank
2 points
you.
because you do smell nice. Jenna, -5 points because you told us that you were going to work in long hair, don't care. And this perfectly teed it up for you, and nothing.
Oh, that's a
not
fair
even an
point,
attempt.
Jenna.
That's
Negative.
so unfair. I had the whole
That's
episode
fair.
to work in long hair, don't care. This is outrageous.
We're talking
This
about a
is-
hair care product right
Yeah,
now.
where is it
that's
going to get
fair.
you in?
How could you not have
I
segued into that?
I did not make that connection, actually. That's all right. I deserve
-5.
negative points. I'll take it back. Yeah. All right,
First,
that's fair.
first
That's
person
fair.
to have negative points in the history of Punchy. Okay, moving on to story 2. Influencers are charging more for their services across social media platforms. A very just simple headline from Marketing Brew. And I want to also talk about, as I said, the ROI, or however we're going to talk about kind of the justification, measurement, business impact of influencers. So if only we had someone from an influencer company here to talk about this, but we'll have to get them for next time. Kim, kick us off.
Yes. Yeah. So did you reference the article? Did you mention the article from Morning Brew? So I did not appreciate the energy that was coming from that article at all. I felt like there was a negative skew to equity and influencer pay. I don't know why. Like, influencers are entrepreneurs that are running small businesses, right? And this is a conversation that's surfacing in the workforce around equity, fair pay. Why are we having a negative opinion about influencers being transparent about the fees that they're getting paid? Because brands have to pay them their value? Like, that's ridiculous. The energy coming out of that article was absolutely atrocious and frustrating, to be honest with you. We should be encouraging transparency around influencer pay. That's incredible, right? That they're actually talking about it. They're still undervalued. We're still, as brands, paying them probably not what they're worth. The reason they are worth something is because they're showing results. They're driving business outcomes, right? So yeah, I was not appreciative of that article at all. No offense to the article.
Yeah, influencers of the world, unite. This is
Yes.
100%.
Are you a gaming influencer, Jenna?
No, absolutely not. I'm not even like a wandering around influencer, like just like existing in life influencer. No, I 100% agree. This had like big like avocado toast millennial vibes to it, and I was not into it. I'm not into that. I may have, like I said, like some professional quibbles about like, again, like the appropriateness or usefulness of influencers in various points, but I'm absolutely never going to be against like, yeah, like clearly if brands are paying them and like they should be paid more, I'm absolutely never going to stand for being like, oh really, are like the big bad like corporate brands like, oh, do they have to like pay more to like their mom and pop influencers? Right. Oh, that's so sad for you.
And probably still not paying a fair rate.
Yeah, right. Like, oh, let me go find the world's smallest violin that your marketing activities have gotten like moderately more expensive. Also, I will say on a very practical note, as a planner, I would really like equity and standards like in pay. It's like, oh, I can be like, okay, great. Here's a more standardized range for if I want this many pieces of content, here's how I have the budget for this. That's a very like small practical thing. And I am more ideologically on the like, yeah, fucking pay people. But also I do care about that as a planner because that's nice and convenient for me.
But I think that's
also,
the thing, right?
Marketers have overpaid forever.
Yeah,
exactly. Like at the end of the day, there's always going to be a variance in how people are paying versus the value on channels. Maturing channels, maturing opportunities just have a transparency and a standard there that at least allows you to A, act ethically, and B, start to understand the value you're getting back. And it's just the next step on that. The article just had, like, I think like we've already talked about, it's very kind of old man yells at cloud kind of energy versus recognizing that's just where things are going. It's a Simpsons reference. There's gotta be one.
It's always a Simpsons reference with you, DuBose. We need to shift into Seinfeld. Nobody gets, like, if you talk, like, so many people just don't get Seinfeld references anymore, and it makes me sad.
Didn't I say, like, in one of the first episodes, I was like, I don't want to Costanza all over this, and then I proceeded to Costanza all over the episode where I ran about TikTok?
We're gonna lose our audience, Jenna. We're gonna lose our audience.
We live in a society.
Any final thoughts on this? Otherwise, I'm going to give out some points. Kim, you get 10 points for the passion.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very
Positive
sharp
energy.
answer. I love it. Yeah, anything that gets Jenna to fist bump gets extra points. DuBose, you get 2 points. I would have given you more if it was a Seinfeld reference, so keep that in mind for the next round. And Jenna, you get 5 points for your answer and 1 point for working in the word quibble. So you are now up to 0. And DuBose, you're at 4. Kim, you're at 14.
Your
Going
math
into
is
the last round.
terrible. I would be at +1. If I had -5 and you just gave me 5 and then 1 extra point, I would be at 1. But you're about to detract that point because I corrected you, and I'm fine with that. It was worth it.
Yes, I am. You're at 0. All right, here we go. Third story. All right. Why many brands failed on their anti-racist promises and it didn't matter for Marketing Dive. I'm also going to work in a couple stats here from an article in the Washington Post that actually came out a year ago, but it talked about how much brands in America committed to racial equality and how little of that actually turned into anything. So actually, why don't we start there? So this article from the Washington Post, again, a year ago, analyzes the racial justice pledges following George Floyd's death in the US. And looking at it, more than 90% of the amount that was committed, $45.2 billion, that's the total amount, is allocated as loans or investments that these companies could stand to profit from. And $4.2 billion of the total pledge is in the form of outright grants, but actually a tiny fraction of that has actually been delivered, only $70 million. So I think that's been talked about a little bit, but the thing I think is interesting from this Marketing Dive article is it basically talks about how, this is something that incumbents, big brands have tried to pivot to and say they were going to do something, but actually really didn't walk the walk. And this article from Marketing Dive talks about how challenger brands, or a lot of challenger brands, are really baking this into who they are. So it talks about how, to varying degrees, these challenger brands have pulled anti-racism closer to the core of their business strategies and brand DNA. They talk about kind of 3 different prototypes or types of challenger brands when it comes to racial equality. There's the agitator that's really trying to, shout a little bit louder, get other people to pay attention to this. There's the infrastructure builder, which are the brands that have kind of come up with permanent programs within their companies and institutionalized anti-racist efforts. And then there's the complete gamer, the brands that have embedded anti-racist principles into the very core of their business model. So DuBose, I'm going to start with you because I know you have thoughts on this, and I think it dovetails a little bit into the research we're now doing on pragmatic purpose for Rival Spark. So what are your thoughts on this topic?
I think it's one of the things we're thinking about for our current Rival Spark research into purpose. And I think, this is a perfect example of purpose that isn't internalized into the core of a business. It doesn't exist on the balance sheet, doesn't exist. It's a promise or a commitment, but not action. And I think it's not surprising that there are a lot of brands that made a lot of commitments more out of reaction than out of measured response, and then didn't internalize it in a way to where they could put it out and actually deliver on those promises fully. I think exactly as you've talked about, the brands that have at least started thinking about how they behave internally more responsibly, or how they can do something that is central to their business in a way that tangibly delivers something. I think, the argument on whether or not brands joining a bandwagon is a sense of, consensus that something is moving is one that's open. But I think when we start to move beyond the moment where everyone feels like they need to join in, the brands that we're seeing that actually deliver change, actually deliver tangible impact, are the ones that don't take this as CSR. They don't take this as a message to be posted. They take it as something to really fundamentally think about how they operate as an organization, how they operate internally and externally, and align that to deliver this change. And I think, regardless of the cause, if you're not seeing a business do that, if you're not seeing a brand do that, it is not surprising, despite the best of intents, at a certain point, it just fades away.
So what are you seeing with some of the early research, early data that's coming back from the research that you're running on this?
I think there's a few things. I think the things we tried to consider for pragmatic purpose were how important is purpose actually to consumers? And then what does it do to actually affect change, both in purchase behavior and brand attitude? And the second thing was, are all issues created the same? And I think the 2 things we found out of that are there are still factors that trump strong brand purpose: price, product reality, especially in an economic downturn that's coming. there's a sense that purpose, more often than not, is a value multiplier, not a value creator for products and brands. And I think that's why it's so important that the business reality that brands have or products have is integrated to the purpose that they want to stand for, because then it's a bit more of a virtuous circle. I think the second thing we found is when you look at different issues, obviously consumer engagement with different issues across a spectrum of things from society through to business, economy, health, there's massive changes in what consumers will engage with. And obviously that shifts over time and cultural discussion. One of the things we did find, though, is that there's an expectation that brands address many of these issues more than consumers will. Brands are expected to be leaders in the space. They're expected to step up and do more. And I think the interesting thing there is with that expectation comes a level of trust. But to deliver and actually keep that trust, you have to do something. You have to deliver action. And I think more and more what you're finding with brands and purpose is it's less a badging exercise, like we were talking about earlier with the story for some brands. It's more the idea of if you're going to operate like a charity, if you're going to have the expectations of a charity, show the results of an NGO or show the results of a cause-based organization. And to do that, you've got to take these things seriously and you've got to plan for the long term.
Kim, anything to add?
Well, I would love, so I'm going to be a little bit of I'm going to approach this a little differently. And DuBose, I'd love your thoughts on how, so you're talking about building, right? You're talking about currently building the agency in a very obviously deliberate way to ensure that you're taking into account equity and you just your overall sense ethos of who you are as a company, right? How do you take how does a brand that's already exists in society, a big brand that's starting to steer the ship to be more mindful of race and equity, how do they message that they're taking action? I want to believe as the optimist that there is much more action being done that is maybe not being talked about or that the consumer is not seeing. So how would you suggest that brands sort of, without participating in performative marketing, how do brands let the consumer know that this is important and they are actually taking action?
It's such a good question, right? I think one of the things we were thinking about the research, one of the things that I think comes across is there's probably different roles that brands can play when it comes to purpose. I think even the word purpose implies a very fixed action you take. You have to have a vision, you have to put it forward. But a lot of what we've been thinking about is there are roles you can take on either side of that. There's the idea of activist brands that are going out there and taking a much more aggressive stance. What you believe is great, but here's us putting it into action. And the flip side of that is there are brands that are just acting more responsibly. I think what we're finding, and I think what's interesting to the point of brands that are probably doing more but not talking about it, is especially for heritage brands, larger traditional brands, leaders in the market, there's a lot of just getting your house in order. I think what we need to think of as
That's
marketers is there's not a lot of shame in actually just sitting down and making sure that you've gone from negative to neutral to start with. And that doesn't have to be a big campaign. That doesn't have to be a big thing that you're saying we're trying not to be evil now. I think instead it's the idea of just getting that in order so you have the foundation to then go, hey, here's what we believe. And it's actually believable, because I think a lot of the time, the more active role that brands take, the more scrutiny that's going to be there. So I think a lot of the time thinking about how you can start to remove those barriers, or at least be a good corporate citizen to start with, is the foundation that I think, sometimes when it doesn't go well, brands seem to have skipped through straight to the big soaring kind of tearjerker ad. And while there's a role for that, I think there's a lot of work that needs to go in beforehand. And one would hope, I think a lot of brands are quietly doing that so that there is more of a justifiable position they can take on a lot of social issues.
Yeah, that was my hope. When I was reading the data around how much action has actually been taken, I hope the optimism in me thinks that it's underrepresented.
Jenna, anything to add?
I don't know. I have a slightly more vulgar version of what DuBose said, which is mine is you need to shut the fuck up about anti-racism until you're actually doing things internally that give you any credibility on this topic. For me, this is such a, you do not need to be a part of the conversation when there are other people who are doing a lot more important things a lot better. And that for a lot of brands, I think that it would be more useful if you would just support like those other things and just say, you know what, like we're not going to shout about this. Like we still need to get our house in order a little bit. Which I wish that there was more of a just shut up instinct sometimes, like in marketing, like especially around like these types of like issue-based things before people figure this out. But I don't know. I was just reminded when we were at dinner last night, I was talking to Gus about, we were talking about like, hey, what do we think, or, what would we maybe like to work on? And like I said, on like the sustainability and climate change piece in media. And he was like, I think that there's a lot of people who are like up here and are like really lofty about like, what is the purpose of this? And really like, what should we be doing? Like, what are the big goals that we should have? But there's not really a lot of people who are really involved in the development of like the practical solutions of those things, like on a day-to-day basis. Like there's really just kind of like the big ideological like promises rather than the people who are on the ground making the day-to-day changes, where it's like, what is happening with like junior level HR who screens like applications for like hiring, like for a lot of these brands. I just think that was like an interesting parallel of, I just think as brands, as marketers, as professionals, we just haven't yet figured out the paradigm of how do we connect big lofty ideas to the practical day-to-day basis of doing business, not just on anti-racism, but on a lot of these types of purpose and cause driven things. It's hard.
But also we're saying shut the fuck up and do the work, but we're also saying you're not doing it.
Yeah.
Because we don't know. So like it's like a really tough position. I'm definitely not supportive, or I am. I'm definitely not trying to champion like brands and how they have approached race relations at all. But I think that there's mixed messages in marketing, right? We're saying shut the fuck up, do the work, but also we're not hearing that there's work being done. So you know what I mean? It's like a double-edged sword. And I appreciated the author's comment on the article, which is like maybe the way we're measuring, like I think in general marketers are poor at setting the infrastructure around measurement. So how are we measuring success in race relations as it pertains to corporations, I think is interesting. And I think she compared that to how we're measuring sustainability for big oil companies. So I like the parallels there, but I think that there's sort of a double-edged sword in terms of how companies are approaching purpose and what they can talk about and what they can't talk about.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's so true, right? Like you go, I think there is nothing more powerful though than quietly doing something and then have someone call you out for it. I think more brands need to lean into the idea that if someone's like, okay, well, what are you doing? And you're like, for the last year, we've been doing this. And you're the first person to ask. Like, I think that's something that as marketers and even as consumers, you'd wish that there was a bit more applause for. Because I think that's the kind of earnest action. But you're right. Otherwise, it's a double-edged sword. Go hurry up and do it. But by the way, you need to have laid the groundwork to do it well years ago. And I think until you can crack that, or there's a conversational shift, it's a hard thing for brands to do.
Yeah, agreed.
Kim, do you remember back in the day, and maybe this is still the case, how passionate Gary was about those like social media, not sweepstakes, but brands that would be like, retweet this and we'll donate $1 to charity.
Oh yeah,
that type of thing. You remember that? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I think that's, like I agree with that. It's like he would always be like, don't ask for something in order for you to do something right. If you want to do something right, go do something right. I think that's a bit kind of what you're talking about, DuBose. All right.
Yeah, although that is a little bit of performance marketing as well. Like retweet.
What do you mean?
Like you're putting it out there, right? Like you're putting yourself out there. You're not shutting up and doing the work. You're actually saying like you're
I'm
performing.
saying I'm saying what you're saying, which is like, don't do that. Just make the donation.
Okay. Yeah.
Don't make it into a marketing thing. Like if you believe in that cause or that charity or whatever it is, don't I don't know. You don't have to kind of parading it around, like making big commitments, PR. That's one thing. But actually, I think that type of thing is even worse because you're like, we're only going to do this if you give us something.
Right.
It's pretty fucked up, actually.
Disgusting.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting. Go ahead.
I just think there needs to be radical honesty about it. If you're going to do that with an idea, it should be like, we didn't think this creative idea was strong enough, so now we're donating to charity. And I think if someone just came out and said that straight out, I would appreciate that at least the first time. I
love that. And I think this is what's interesting in the pragmatic purpose research that you're doing, and also just in general. Like, I think people just want authenticity and almost humility to that extreme of like, I think even if you don't get something right, I think people just want to hear that from you. And there's so many brands that try to front and try to make everything seem like they're amazing. And I think, I don't know, I think increasingly people are open to kind of a much more human, realistic and humble approach when it comes to
You
anything.
do?
It's certainly this.
I
I do.
don't. We're living in
I do.
cancel culture. Like, I
Personally,
just
no,
feel
no.
like
No, I'm not saying if you like did something wrong. I'm saying if like DuBose's example of like, we couldn't come up with an idea, so we're just going to do this. That type of thing certainly speaks to me.
oh, for sure. But I think if it's like, we did this, it failed. Okay, we fucked up. Like, I don't know that there's as much grace from the consumer on those types of plays.
Yeah. Well, let me put it another way or give another example. I think that if you're a company that maybe doesn't have the best history or approach to race right now, I think it's okay to say, hey, here's where we are. It's not good. We're working on it. We're not there now.
Agreed.
We're not going to make sweeping commitments that we can't, know for sure we're going to accomplish, but we're prioritizing this. Here's the roadmap. Here's how we're going to do it. That type of thing. I think people are much more accepting of honesty on that front.
I agree.
All right. Violent agreement in the end. Lots of points to give out from that conversation. Kim, I'm going to give you 5. Jenna, I'm going to give you 5 as well. DuBose, I'm going to give you 15. I think that was really smacking your wheelhouse. And also, I want to hear
Wow.
your rant and rave. And I think you deserve to finally win one. So,
You can't put your fingers on the scale like this. This is people
Okay.
come to this
I
for
can do
a
it if I
fair and
want.
honest competition.
-5 points for Jenna. You are back to 0.
Yes.
Jenna, it's not the metric system. Don't try to understand it.
But Jenna,
whatever.
long hair don't care.
Long hair don't care. Yes. There it is.
DuBose,
Thanks,
what you
Kim.
got for us? Rant or rave?
I've got a rave. So one that stood out to me in the last few weeks that I think is worth calling out is what Virgin Atlantic's been doing with its new brand rollout and with some of its employee policies. So for anyone that hasn't kind of flown Sir Richard's flying nightclub recently, I think it's one of those interesting things that like Virgin Atlantic has always been, in my mind, positioned really weirdly, especially for those of us that live in the UK versus British Airways. Like British Airways is kind of like the proper aunt or uncle you have, and then like Virgin Atlantic, it was kind of like the cool uncle who's maybe not actually an uncle but a family friend who just kind of rides a motorcycle and shows up every now and then. Like cool but a bit frayed around the edges. And I really, really love that. A, like I think they finally embrace that, and B, the way they're positioning themselves comes through in some of their policies. So if you haven't seen, one of the things that they've done is they've now said that their air stewards don't have to cover up tattoos, so they can basically wear uniforms that kind of show their own individuality.
Yeah.
It's really interesting because, like, as an ad campaign, it's okay. It's not amazing. It was kind of the whole, hey, we're all individuals, isn't this great? But I think the fact that they substantiated it by being like, look, we are not British Airways. No one in British Airways owns up to probably having a tattoo. But if it's Virgin Atlantic, things are a bit crazier. There might be shots. And, just lean into the idea that everyone's an individual and make it feel a bit vibier. So I think it's a great example of a brand that really acknowledges where it is in the market and then has taken its positioning and exploded it through to its policies as well. So that's one that I absolutely love.
I really like that. Can you send me a link so we can add it to the show notes?
I will.
Also, my takeaway from this is that now I can go be a steward on Virgin Atlantic. That's my takeaway from this, is that now that's a career option for me.
Jenna, you have a job.
Yeah, but free flights.
We love a side hustle, though.
Yeah, like
Why don't we go get Virgin Atlantic as a client for Rival? That's a
we go.
good workaround for that.
There we go.
I like it better that Jenna's going to try to secretly be a marketing consultant and an air steward at the same time. Like
They
there'll be a
have Wi-Fi
meeting
on
where
those
this
planes.
is going to,
It's
you're
not
going to
very
have to
good,
pass
though.
out
Let's be honest.
towelettes and at the same point consult.
Can we talk about like Wi-Fi, in-air Wi-Fi? That is a space that needs disruption. I don't think I've ever made
Elon
it.
Musk is doing it, right? Starlink. He did that deal with Hawaiian Airlines.
Yeah.
I like it because
a little bit late,
like,
Kim.
But it's true though. It could be better, and there's so much cachet around it. I like buying in-flight Wi-Fi because the credit card processing says it's going to a satellite, so you feel a bit like a Bond villain, like you're paying for stuff in Vera bonds. It's lovely. It doesn't matter that it's 10 quid for like an hour. It's fancy.
Yeah. And then it doesn't work. But
I think all credit card processing goes through satellites, DuBose.
Don't ruin this for me, Jenna.
Okay.
He's a spy. Come on.
I just stopped trying with in-flight Wi-Fi. I honestly just don't even bother anymore. All right, we are over on time. So I'm impressed that Kim finally got in the long hair don't care reference. I'm disappointed that nobody came through with the Seinfeld reference, but Jenna and DuBose, you're gonna have to do that next time. I need to check who our guest is. I'll need to give him or her a heads up. But Kim, thank you so much for joining us, particularly
Thank you for
so
having
early.
me.
Jenna and DuBose, I guess y'all are all right as well.
Cannes next
DuBose,
week.
congrats. Cannes next week. We're in Cannes next
You
week.
can.
Or VidCon.
And,
Or VidCon.
VidCon
VidCon
and
next
Cannes.
week.
We're not at
Now,
VidCon.
do they
We're
have
not-
steak
we're not.
tartare at VidCon?
Probably not.
Yeah.
Everywhere has
it's
steak
in,
tartare.
We only go to conferences that have steak tartare.
Fancy.
All right. We're going to wind this down. DuBose, congrats on your first win. Kim, thanks again. Thanks everybody who's
Thank
listening.
you.
See you next week. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Punchy is a production of Rival. We are a growth consultancy that builds challenger brands, strategies, and capabilities to disrupt categories. If you want to learn more about us, check out wearerival.com. If you want to connect with Jenna, DuBose, or myself, email us at media@wearerival.com or find us on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, share with anyone you think might enjoy it, and leave us a review. Thanks so much for listening, and see you next week.